This was Albus Dumbledore. I'm a Potterhead, sorry. Very much millennial. I'm telling my age right now.
I want to make sure he doesn't grow up to be a loser like these manosphere guys. They have nothing to teach you.
How do I keep them from seeing the Andrew Tates of the world and all
Oh
of that?
my gosh. I need you to be able to be courageous enough to stand up against the forces of patriarchy that will try to convince you to do things and be things.
Why do
Oh
we
my
teach
gosh.
women that, oh, be careful, close your legs and all this and that? And it's like, who are we scared of? Men. But why aren't we raising better boys?
If you can't see that stuff in the past, you may not be able to see a better future.
They didn't even learn about slavery. They learned about a peculiar institution. I cannot tell you how my jaw hit the floor.
In part because they believe the propaganda.
And that's how you keep people stagnant.
Don't half step. What does that mean, Dad? What does it mean to half step?
Now I'm a boy mom, and it honestly terrifies me.
But I am so much more emotionally available.
Absolutely. I mean, you said that beautifully. I have nothing to add to that. Yeah, I mean, parenthood has a way of just bringing fears that you didn't know you had at the forefront of your life. And there's such a fine balance between, acting with love or acting with fear when it comes to your parents, right? Because when it comes to being a parent, because I don't want to project my fears onto my children.
Oh my goodness.
And at the same time, fears that I didn't even know I had are constantly coming up because, their safety and it's a constant like whirlwind of stress and anxiety, that I'm working on so that I don't project that onto my children. And then at the same time, it's like, I want to do everything humanly possible to keep my children safe, right? And so it's a really hard balance to strike. And when you add in world, events and, all of the things going on, it becomes that much more, you're like, overwhelming. And I try not to, let that get in the way of action, right? Because I think that's the purpose of a lot of what's going on. It's like they're trying to make us feel hopeless to where we don't do anything about it, right? And that's how you keep people stagnant, because you're like, well, we can't do anything about it anyway. So what are we going to do? And I don't ever want to lose that, viewpoint of no, if we are not, each of us are not doing what we actively think is what will help this world become a better place for our kids, then yeah, we are actually doing harm to the future generations. And so that's where I try to stay in the mindset, despite all of the fears and actually in spite of the fears.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. That's the right mindset, Katia. I mean, I think about the fact that my grandmother was born in a time, all of my grandparents were born in a time when, Black folks, where they didn't have rights in this country. And, they kept on keeping on, like they kept pushing forward. And if they could survive it all, my grandmother cleaned houses for bigots, as a young person. She was not able to, her vote was not protected until she was into her 20s. You know what I mean? Like we are really living in times where we can look back and see that there are folks who pushed through some of the worst, right? I think about Supreme Court decisions can get us down sometimes. And our ancestors lived through the Dred Scott decision, and they lived through Plessy v. Ferguson, and they lived through a host of other decisions that that were constantly telling us that we were less than and undeserving and unworthy. And they pushed through anyway, and they came up with legal theories, and they marched and they boycotted, and they all found something to do and some way to participate in the push for better and for more. And I really am encouraged by looking back at that history in this moment, because if without that perspective, which is worth saying, I think part of the reason why there's been such a concerted effort to, remove and diminish and ban history and erase and attempts to erase history is that they know, those who are trying to kind of control a certain narrative and trying to push the country in a certain direction know that if you look back to the women's suffrage movement, if you were to look back to the uprisings across the country and across the South during times of enslavement and the multiracial efforts that were brought together through that time to seek freedom, if you were to look back at those times, you might be encouraged to do something today. But if we can erase that and if we can obscure that history and you don't know anything about where we've all come from to get to this moment, where folks in New York City, where Jewish people and Latino people and Black people and white people and across the country came together to say, we actually want civil rights for everybody. We want religious freedom for everybody. We want voting rights for everybody. If you can't look back and see that and be inspired by that, you might not do something today, right? Like if you can't see that stuff in the past, you may not be able to see a better future. And so in this moment, I think a lot of people are very discouraged, when they look at our political climate and our political moment that we're living in. But I am, I felt a little knocked down at times too, but I'm always encouraged when I look back at the history and think about where we've come from and how much effort, how much great work we stand on the shoulders of in this moment as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you said that beautifully. I have nothing to add to that, but I hope people, listen and realize. This has been coming for, since far back, defunding education,
Yeah.
defunding, social programs and community programs that actually help people, communities thrive, not just survive, but thrive. That's the key to all of what's happening now. They've managed it through, decades of this kind of defunding and dehumanizing, and erasure is exactly what's happened. When I went to college, like I left my island of Puerto Rico to go to college, and I went to Texas. And so my education, I was homeschooled, and I had a
Mm.
pretty objective, world history textbook where I learned about world history through not necessarily an American lens. And so I feel like it was objective. So I learned maybe correct history. And then I come to this country, to the mainland, to Texas, and I learn from my fellow companions in class. I studied international relations. And some of them said that in high school, they went to high school in Texas, they didn't even learn about slavery. They
Mm.
learned about a peculiar institution. And I
Mm.
cannot tell you how my jaw hit the floor. I
Mm.
was shocked and floored that had happened. And I think at the time I was a little naive and I didn't realize that that's all been an intentional thing when it comes to the education system in this country, where, they're veering some kind of, narrative away from learning correct history. And it's all about the erasure of, what the realities are of, racism in this country. And we see it. They took away, DEI, and there's just so many topics that we could, continue to talk about. But the bottom line is that we need to continue to advocate for all of these policies and changes that further
Mm.
education, correct education, and just that helps communities thrive. Because if we are keeping communities, very specific communities, from access, from healthcare, from, maternal mortality rates, the Black maternal mortality rate, which I talk about a lot. There's just you just keep looking at it, and you're like, oh, well, that makes so much sense. That's what they're doing. They're trying to keep these entire communities from having access to thrive in this country. And it's so clear and it's so apparent, and it's just so disheartening to see the amount of people that choose not to see it, because I don't want to say that it's not right in front of them. They just have chosen not to see it.
Yeah. Well said.
I wanted to ask you, as a Black father in this country, is there anything that you think that other people don't really have to think about while raising children, that you want to share, and or if you don't want to talk about that, has a, newly, I guess, because you're a father now, you've always been a Black man in this country, but has a perspectives changed now that you are a father, considering the current climate, as we've been talking about? There's so much, I think, so much impact there that you probably need to think about that other people don't have to think about. Any of that you can share?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that, when I grew up with an amazing dad, black dad, I guess it's just my
Mhm.
dad, but yes, he's a black man, and it was incredible and present, and worked hard for our family. He passed away. My dad passed away in 2021, and I'm heartbroken every day that he isn't here to like experience this with me and like be a part of my son's life and see his grandson.
Mm,
Um, but I think a lot about the things that he instilled into me and the ways that he pushed me to be, the best that I can be. And I think some of those things are universal. I think that all fathers have the opportunity to say, "Son, get up early in the morning and work hard and make your bed, put your clothes away, do things the right way the first time.
mhm,
Measure twice, cut once." Those kinds of things that my dad would repeat often. Don't half step, which was one of his favorite things to say. What does that mean, Dad? What does it mean to half step? Like, but he would say that don't half step. And so, like, I think those things I certainly wanted to pass along as well. But I always had this awareness that we were black. I grew up in Atlanta, which in
mm,
some ways was one of the best places in the world to grow up as a black kid in the 90s. And I think a lot about just what it meant to see so many incredible black people from all walks of life around me at all times. And so I've thought about that a lot with my son in this moment. I think there is an effort to paint, you know, uh, certain groups of people, whether it be Muslim people, often black people, Latino immigrants, right? Like in a certain light, in a certain way. And I've become hyper aware of what it means to make sure that my son sees himself in a variety of people.
mhm,
I was never of the opinion. I've met people of color who have a pretty low view of other people of color, in part because they believe the propaganda in a way,
mhm,
right? They're
mhm,
like, oh well, black people are like this, or Mexicans are like this, or Puerto Ricans are like this, or whatever, or Asians are only this one way, right? And like I've had that, I've experienced that, and I never felt that way personally because I always was able to I was in a place where I was able to see so much diversity, and so that's been on my mind. And I don't know if everybody thinks about that,
mhm,
but I certainly want my son to kind of grow up feeling like he can see himself anywhere in the kind of
mhm,
socio-economic, anywhere in the educational kind of spectrum. He can just see he can envision himself achieving any number of things, whatever he decides to do.
mhm,
And it doesn't feel like that's something that's outside of the scope of a person from his race or from his class or whatever the thing is. I just want
mhm,
him to be able to kind of have all the options. That's the thing that's been on my mind the most.
mhm. Yeah, and I think obviously that starts at home. The way you frame, as you said, other people, other cultures, other
Yeah.
religions, um, and I think the media is so important because representation does matter. As kids, and I've said it before, and obviously, again, there's ways we can do that at home, and we don't have to depend on outside sources to do that for us and for our kids. But inevitably our kids are going to be around movies and and shows, and whether we kind of curate what they can watch in order for them to be able to see the representation or not. I think that will also impact their worldview, because not everyone has maybe like the neighborhood or the diverse experience from a personal, growing up in a neighborhood that's maybe diverse, stuff like that. Like I certainly didn't have that growing
Mm,
up. I mean, I just knew Puerto Ricans, and we looked all sorts of different, shades. There were black Puerto Ricans, there were white Puerto Ricans, there were like the mulatto, So I didn't have a lot other than that growing up. But I think my mom was intentional in giving me a pretty broad worldview, despite not being able to afford actually going to visit these places, and like
Mm.
different communities and different cultures and all of that. And the older we get, the more we learn and the more we see. And I think exposure for children is also just so important, and representation. How we curate that for them. I think that's something I never really thought about until, I think the technology just became so widely used,
Right.
and there's a lot more options now to what to watch, and what you see on TV or in social media and all of that. And that's an element that my parents didn't have to think about with us growing up, right? And now that's another added element we have to think about. Like, oh,
Gosh.
how do I keep them from seeing the Andrew Tates of the world and all of
Oh
that?
my gosh. Yeah. Oh my goodness. I know.
Mhm.
I feel like I grew up with like the best. I don't know. I don't know how you feel about this. You don't have to reveal your age on the pod, but like I grew up. I feel like I grew up in the golden era
Mhm.
of like black TV. But I had like Fresh Prince of Bel
Mhm.
Air, you know what I mean? One on One. That you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
I had all of these shows with
Mhm.
all of this amazing black male representation, but also these diverse kind of stories and just like
Mhm.
kind of like hijinks and like goofy folks and everybody, you could be
Mhm.
anything, right? And I feel like now because everything's moved to streaming, first of all, it's all like kind of a la carte in a way where you
Mhm.
got to go like seek it out and choose it. And so there are
Mhm.
things that I just don't even know exist. I'm sure like
Yeah.
there are all these amazing shows. I don't even know they exist because I'm not scrolling endlessly on the Netflix app. And
Mhm.
then to your point, the internet. Oh my God. The internet has just ruined the world. It's ruined it. Like the fact that my kid will probably one day be able to he's like 2 or 3 clicks away from becoming the worst possible man, like seeing the most terrible manosphere content is
Mhm.
terrifying.
Mhm.
I would be devastated if my son became a cornball like Andrew Tate. That would be awful. These people are corny. And so this is another thing. You asked earlier about like the things that I'm, wanting to teach him. I want to make sure he doesn't grow up to be a loser like these manosphere guys. These guys are awful.
Yeah.
And they have nothing to teach you. You have
Mhm.
nothing to learn from these guys. Like literally nothing. They
Yeah.
don't exist in reality. If you've ever seen one of their like live events, you realize these guys are lame. And so anyway, you just sit me
Well,
down like a completely different rabbit hole here, but
no.
I
This is
would
an
hate
important
for my
one.
son.
This is an
It's
important
important.
one.
You're right.
It
It's important.
because as a now able mom, my identity for so long was girl mom, girl mom. I had two girls. Now I'm a boy mom, and it honestly terrifies me because of the amount of pressure and responsibility I have to raise a good man, right? And it's not something I take lightly. We hear all the time, "Oh, boys are easier than girls. Oh, boys are easier than girls." And I think that's the problem because we have not intentionally raised men like little boys to grow up into men that don't rape women. Why do
Oh
we
my
teach
gosh.
women that, oh, be careful, close your legs, or don't do this, or don't dress provocatively and all this and that? And it's like, who are we scared of? Men. But why aren't we raising better boys, right? And so it's
Mhm.
like I went down a rabbit, like when I found out I was pregnant with a boy, I bought all the boy mom books, and I saw adolescence on Netflix, and I was
Oh
crushed. I was like,
yeah.
oh my God, that's horrible. What's happening in the world? And so, to your point, it's if we have, I'm hoping that my philosophy is true and that I can actually impart it into my life and my son's life. But my philosophy is that they if we are actively having these conversations with our boys at home, they have a foundation to where we've already talked about this. So if they hear Andrew Tate say some BS, they can be like, that doesn't sound right. Because at home, I heard something completely different. And they have a foundation to fall back on of like knowledge and information and conversations where they're like, that doesn't sound right to me. Like, no, I refute that. And when we're just assuming that boys can raise themselves, this is what
Mm,
happens, right? And so
mm.
I am not an expert. I have a baby 1-year-old boy, but I'm hoping that based on my research and all of, the things that I hopefully do right, I can raise a good man who's kind and empathetic and courageous and all the things you said at the beginning. That is my hope for, my little boy.
So well said. It is exactly that. I mean, that is a part of the courageous and compassionate mantra for the way I'm raising my son is that I need you to be able to be courageous enough to stand up against the forces of patriarchy that will try to
Mhm.
convince you to do things and be things. What is this? What does this say? Tell me.
Well, we have a different quote every day. I think this one's just so relevant. It says, "We must all face the choice between what is right and what is easy." This was Albus
Mm,
Dumbledore. I'm a Potterhead. Sorry, very much millennial. I'm telling my age right now. But it is so much easier to sometimes
yes.
not make the right choices, and sometimes that's why we need to make the hard choices because it's what's right, oftentimes, and
Yes.
um, our comfort is not more important than doing what is right, what is ethically and morally
Mm,
correct.
mm.
Um,
Powerful.
yeah.
Exactly that. I'm gonna put this part of the pod on repeat in his crib tonight. It's like internalize this,
Internal, yeah.
please.
Let me embody this. Okay, wait. Okay, well, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, but one last question before I do this heart-led speed round. I
Okay.
I think it's really important to model positive masculinity, especially men modeling it for their boys, but also men
Yeah.
for other men out there and other boys. And so I just want to know what if fatherhood, right, has changed, strengthened, or just switched your the way you view masculinity or
Mm.
yourself.
It has. I am so much more emotional. I was probably always this emotional, but I am so much more like emotionally available,
Mhm,
perhaps. I
mhm,
think my emotion, I have fewer layers of filter between what's on the inside and what comes out,
mhm,
especially with crying. I mean, it's almost like at this point, it's almost like cliche,
mhm,
but I think about him at 18 or 21, or think about him like long gone, 30 something. He's completely out on his own in the world, like doing his thing. And I get like emotional about it. Like,
mhm,
oh man, that day's coming. My boy's gonna be out there doing his thing. I mentioned this, it's obviously on my mind, but like sometimes people will drive fast down my street and I get like angry to the
mhm,
point of like, I'm not I'm not gonna cry, but it's like I'm so mad because like
mhm,
I feel this protective thing coming up. It's like I
mhm,
just feel like these emotions of like fear really is what
mhm,
that really is. I'm just
mhm,
afraid and I don't want him to be in danger. And the way I just feel like expressing that is through shaking my fist at the speeders. You know what I mean? It's I feel these things, and I feel
mhm,
like I'm much more, at the very least, aware of all of these feelings as they surface.
mhm,
And I think that's in part because he's looking at me often and I'm around him and I have to kind of think about that. And so, I mourn. I think what it kind of ultimately comes to, and I saw this happen. I'll say this. I saw this happen with my dad. When he got a certain age, he started crying a lot more. And it was weird to me growing up. It's like, dude, that's weird. And what I realize now, and I don't think I'm quite there. I mean, I'm getting glimpses of what I will probably eventually be like. One day I'll probably just be a big ball of tears all the time. But I think the idea of masculinity, the performance of masculinity is so exhausting. It is
mhm,
tiresome. And there are these moments where you can't perform anymore. And some of that is just like my love for my son. I can't perform the like I have it all together and I'm so well put
mhm,
together. I can't perform that with him
mhm.
because I love him too much.
Yeah.
And I think like even thinking about my dad as he got a little older, I just think he got tired of the performance of it all. And I don't know if we always have the language for that.
Mhm,
I've heard men say like, "Oh, you hit 40, oh, you hit 50 and suddenly like you just like cry all the time." And like I've heard them say that in the past and I didn't really know what it was, but now I think I have some language to describe it, which is just that there is a performance of masculinity that robs us of the ability to kind of express the full range of our emotions in the here and now.
mhm,
And I've become really violently opposed to that performance and really tired of that performance. And I've seen it show up in my relationship with my male friends and brothers, and and you kind of just act like everything is okay, and then you hear, oh my God, they were going through something really hard 6 months ago, and they didn't even bring it up.
Hmm.
It's that performance. It's the performance that we're all it's this play that we're all putting on for each other. I don't want
Hmm.
to see the play. And so it's changed my relationship. Like having a baby, a boy in this case, has changed my relationship to that performance.
Hmm. Oh, yes. I think reframing what masculinity is, because I think it's all about strength, right? But if we can really redefine vulnerability as strength, I think,
Yeah,
we will be so much more willing as a
that's right.
society to be comfortable with seeing men cry, with seeing men be vulnerable, because that is ultimately what we all want, even if we don't realize it. We want to be able to access that emotional, you know, side of men that we all have. We're all human. We all, we are capable of all of the emotions, and we have them, and we have to stop in some way or other letting men think that they need to suppress that. They need to suppress their emotions. They need to suppress their authentic emotions and what they feel, right? And um, that would tie me into a whole other tangent of the patriarchy, but I will not do that now.
Next
I
time,
will
next time.
next time. So, okay, before we end, I'm just going to do these rapid fire questions, and then you can answer. Does fatherhood feel more grounding or more overwhelming?
Grounding. I feel
Is
like I could be in the middle. I could be in the middle of either of those at any given moment, but I'm gonna say in this moment, grounding. Okay.
Okay. No, thanks. That's good. I agree. Is awareness a gift or a burden as a parent?
It's probably a burden because I'm aware of so much, and some of that stuff isn't even relevant. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
you can I think about the fact that like when you scroll on social media, you get all these parenting videos that tell you all the ways that your kid could be ruined for life, and it's like, well, I'm aware of that stuff, but actually I don't even really need to be. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like really that
Yeah.
stuff isn't like they'll be fine. We're doing our best every day. That's the best we can do. And now this awareness is actually like kind of giving me anxiety.
Yeah, I think it depends on context, because some people need to be a little bit more aware of what's around them. But you
Fair.
specifically, that answer, I agree with you. Has
Fair.
has becoming a dad made you more hopeful or more cautious?
Hopeful.
What matters more right now, impact or presence?
Oh, that's such a tough one because like you could be present but having a bad impact.
Mm,
You know what I mean? So like
hmm.
that would be awful. I'm gonna
Hmm.
say impact. I'm gonna say
Hmm.
impact.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
think
and
yeah, yeah,
that's so true, because I am present with my kids all the time, and then I realize I'm not my best self because I have had zero time for me, and so I'm not being a good mom. And you guys can do without me for an hour while I go work out, and then I'll be back and I'll be a better mom,
yep,
or do my
yep,
podcast and I'll come back and I'll be refreshed. So that is also another tangent. I could go on forever, but
yep.
I like that answer. And so to end, I just want to give you space to tell our listeners about any projects you're working on, or where we can find you, or any initiatives, all of that.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Garrison H. There's a link in the bio that will take you to everything else. So definitely go check out my YouTube, my Instagram content or short form content on Instagram and TikTok. Is different than what I make over on YouTube, which is longer form and kind of more in depth. And so check me out in those two places for sure. You can also subscribe to my newsletter on Substack, where I typically answer people's questions that they send to me and kind of pursue the things that folks are really curious about in this time. I have a big project that I'm excited to announce in just a few months. And so I will be doing that across all platforms, but you'll probably see it first through my newsletter. And so would love for you to subscribe there and be the first to know.
Thank you. Garrison, ever since we met at the Global Clinton Initiative, I just had been dying for you to come on the show. And I'm so happy, the time worked out, and, that you've given us your time and brilliance. So honestly, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Unaparent podcast, produced by Studio Dama and hosted by me, Katia Lindor. If you like what you heard, subscribe or follow us on social media and tune in as we share deeply human stories about the unapparent truths of parenting.